7:42 on a Monday morning. An 18-wheeler backed into the yard at Caldwell Powertrain. The driver tossed a delivery slip onto the bench and said only one thing. CEO Verain signed it. She said a backwoods mechanic could keep the trash. He turned and unlatched the trailer. 6 engine blocks sat dust-covered and dented, lined up like corpses on the concrete floor. Holt walked to block number 3. He wiped dust from the casting mark. His hand trembled. Not from shame, from recognition. 4 years ago, he himself had assembled this block. 5 weeks from now, she would have to take back every word. Stay with me to the end. Subscribe. The truck left the lot at 7:58. The block stayed. Holt stood among them for a long time. The shop was quiet except for the tick of a cooling exhaust pipe outside. He moved from one to the next, reading the serial numbers under his breath. 0017, 0022, 0041, 0046, 0053, 0068. He knew every one of them. He had signed every one of them. By 8:30 he had pulled the bay doors closed. The next morning, a charcoal Range Rover came up Sweeten Creek Road and parked in front of the shop. Maren Verain stepped out alone, a leather folio under her arm. She did not knock. She walked straight to the workbench where Holt was cleaning a wrench, and she set down a single sheet of paper. My counsel needs a supplementary waiver. Same terms as Monday. Sign here. Holt set the wrench down. He did not look up at first. He read the supplement line by line. Maren watched him with the flat patience of someone who had never, in her adult life, had to wait for a mechanic to finish reading. Take your time, Mr. Caldwell. I'm sure the language is unfamiliar. He did not answer. He turned the page, read Clause 4.2 again, and signed. She had expected a question, a negotiation, some small flinch. She got nothing. She slid the signed page back into her folio. As she turned to go, she let her eyes drift across the shop. Tool chests in order, engine stands clean, a poster on the wall. IMSA 2014, the Verain car with number 17 on the door. She paused there for half a second, then continued toward the door. Charming little operation you have here. Very rustic. She closed the door behind her without waiting for a reply. Holt listened to the Range Rover pull away. He spoke once to the empty room, the way a man tests a thought to see if it holds. Are you sure you don't want to keep block number 3, Miss Verain? It was not for her. It was for the part of himself that was already deciding what came next. In the corner of the small office, a child looked up from a paperback. Wren was 9. She had her mother's eyes and her father's quiet. Dad, your hand was shaking again. I'm all right, sweetheart. He crossed the office, opened the bottom drawer of an old steel desk, and lifted out a folder yellowed at the edges. Inside were technical drawings, hand-annotated, signed at the bottom corner. H. Caldwell, Chief Powertrain Engineer. He laid the folder on the desk and sat down beside Wren. I'm going to be busy for a few weeks, kiddo. I have an old friend to call tonight. Wren leaned against his arm. The lamp on the desk threw a soft yellow circle around them both. Is it a good friend? Yeah, the best one I've got left. That night, after Wren was asleep, Holt picked up the phone and dialed the one number in his contacts he had not called in 3 years. Dell, it's me. I need you at the shop. There's something you have to see in person. Dell Mosby arrived the next morning at 6:15 in a Ford F-150 that had seen better decades. He walked into the bay, stopped 4 steps inside, and did not speak for a full minute. He crossed to block number 3, knelt, read the serial, and looked up at Holt with wet eyes. Verain was actually going to throw them away. Holt handed him the disposal contract. Dell read it once and shook his head slowly. 4 years of your life. Right here, on this floor. He stood, brushed the dust from his knees, and turned to face Holt fully. You need to hear something. Wallace Verain picked you himself in 2009. 3 other candidates were already vetted. He overruled the whole engineering committee for you. He told me once you were the only man he had ever met who understood what a heritage engine was supposed to feel like. Holt did not answer. He had known some of this, not all of it. And the reason you left in 2018, it was not only Eleanor. The board, mostly Voss, sat on your severance for 93 days while she was getting sicker. $2.4 million. They told you it was contingent on a non-compete you could not sign without giving up your own designs. You walked away with nothing. Wallace was in Geneva when it happened. He came back to fire Voss, and he had a stroke before he could finish the paperwork. Holt set both hands flat on the bench. Maren doesn't know any of that. She doesn't know who you are. She doesn't know who Voss is. She walked into her father's company a year ago, with grief in one hand and a balance sheet in the other, and Voss has been steering her ever since. I'm not going to tell her. Dell studied him for a long count. You're going to fix 6 engines and let her think you're a mechanic she insulted. I'm going to fix 6 engines because they deserve to be fixed. The rest is hers to figure out. Dell exhaled, long and slow. All right. What do you need? Crankshaft for number 5, sleeves for number 1, and your hands for 8 weeks. You've got them. That same evening, in a glass-walled office on the 32nd floor in Charlotte, Maren sat at her desk reviewing a quarterly forecast. She closed the laptop and let her eyes drift to the framed photograph on the credenza. Her father Wallace, in 2014, standing beside a man in a white lab coat and safety glasses. The other man's face was half hidden by a hard hat brim. She had passed that photograph 1,000 times. She had never asked who he was. She turned off the desk lamp and gathered her coat. At Caldwell Powertrain, Wren carried 2 mugs of cocoa out to the bay. She handed one to Dell. Dell crouched down to her height. Your daddy used to build engines that won races. He told me. He didn't tell you the whole story. Your daddy is the only man left who knows how to bring these back to life. Wren considered this with the gravity only a 9-year-old can muster. Then I'll bring him cocoa every night until he's done. Dell laughed for the first time in months. Holt watched them both from the bench, and for the first time in 4 years, he did not feel alone in his own shop. By Thursday of the first week, Holt and Dell were running on 14-hour days. Block number 1 was on the machining table. Block number 5 had been stripped down to the bare casting, waiting for its custom crankshaft. Holt's hands moved with the certainty of muscle memory 8 years old. That morning, Maren's assistant called. Counsel needed one more signature, and Miss Verain would prefer to handle it in person at a neutral location, the Double Mountain Coffee House, downtown Asheville, 10 o'clock. Holt washed his hands twice. He did not change his shirt. The flannel had a streak of black across the cuff that would not come out, and he did not pretend it would. The coffee shop was full at 10. Morning regulars at the window bar, a book club at the long table, 2 tourists at the counter. Maren had taken the center table on purpose. She sat with her corporate counsel on her left and 2 junior associates on her right. 3 leather folios stacked between them. A cappuccino steamed in front of each of the 4 people on her side of the table. Across from her, an empty chair, and beside it a glass of water already poured. Holt walked in at 5 minutes past 10. The bell above the door rang once. He had a folded copy of the Mountain Express in one hand and the disposal contract from Monday in the other. He stopped just inside the door to wipe his boots on the mat. Maren looked up, let her eyes travel from his work boots to the smudge on his cuff to the line of grease still visible under his thumbnail. And she said, with the volume of someone who wanted the next table to hear her, Mr. Caldwell, next time, perhaps you could wash the shirt before meeting with my corporate counsel. Or do they not distinguish, up in Asheville, between a shop floor and a conference room? The junior associate on her right laughed, a short, bright sound. The book club table went quiet. A man 2 tables over lifted his phone and angled it toward Maren's table without lowering it. A woman at the window bar, 60s, in a Carhartt jacket, set down her mug and watched. Holt did not break stride. He crossed the room at a steady pace, pulled out the chair opposite Maren, sat down, and set his folded newspaper on the table beside him. He reached for the top folio. May I read the document? By all means. Take your time. We're not paying you by the hour. The junior associate laughed again. Holt took his time. He read Clause 1. He read Clause 2. He read Clause 3. He turned the page and read Clause 4.2 twice. He turned to the signature page, took the pen Maren's counsel offered, and signed in 3 places without comment. He pushed the folio back across the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not look away. Are you sure you don't want to keep block number 3, Miss Verain? Maren's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She had heard him say that line once before, except she had not been there to hear it. She had only the words now, and the way he was looking at her when he said them. For a moment she could not place why her spine had gone cold. Holt stood. He picked up his newspaper, slid it under his arm, nodded once to the corporate counsel, and walked back past the book club table, past the man with the raised phone, past the woman in the Carhartt jacket, and out through the bell at the door. Maren sat very still. Her coffee was cold under her hand. She had not taken a sip in 3 minutes. The junior associate, sensing the temperature had shifted in the room, tried to laugh again and could not find the sound. "Strange man," counsel said. "Yes," Maren said. She did not finish her coffee. She gathered her folios herself, which she never did, and walked out to her car ahead of her own attorneys. The woman in the Carhartt jacket watched her go and did not look away. She drove back to Charlotte with the radio off. She told herself the unease was about nothing. A mechanic who had read a contract carefully, a man in a flannel shirt who had not flinched when she meant to make him flinch. Nothing. But the line about block number 3 sat in her chest the way a stone sits in a shoe. She had not told anyone which block was which. She had not even looked at the serial numbers herself. Voss had handled the manifest. Voss had picked the disposal contractor. Voss had even chosen the loading order onto the truck. How did the mechanic know there was a block number 3? By the start of the second week, she had her personal attorney, not the court. 3 of them had the unusual clause 4.2 granting the receiving party full and final discretion. All 3 had been initiated by Garrett Voss. All 3 had been signed off on with her own electronic signature. Through a delegated authority she had granted Voss in her first month as CEO, when she had been too overwhelmed by grief to read every document that crossed her desk. She read her father's will again that night, alone, in the apartment in Charlotte. She read it slowly, with a pencil, marking in the margin every clause she had not paid enough attention to in the first weeks of grief. There were 6. One of them stopped her. The VP7 Heritage engines shall not be destroyed, transferred, or liquidated in any form without the written consent of the original chief powertrain engineer. She read the clause 3 times. She underlined original. She underlined chief powertrain engineer. She did not know who the original chief powertrain engineer was. She had never thought to ask. On Wednesday, she drove back to Asheville without telling her office. She walked into Caldwell Powertrain at 4 in the afternoon, and the first thing she saw was Del Mosby standing at the parts bench, sorting valve springs into 2 trays, one labeled keep and one labeled replace. She knew him. 22 years at Verain. She had seen him at her father's funeral. He had stood at the back of the room and had not come forward to speak to her. "Mr. Mosby." Del looked up. He glanced once at Holt, who gave the smallest nod, and then he looked back at Maren. "Ma'am, what are you doing here?" "Helping a friend." She turned to Holt. He was at the machining table, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a micrometer in his hand. Block number 3 sat on the bench beside him, honed, oiled, lifted onto a clean cradle. It no longer looked like a corpse. It looked like something waiting. "Who are you, Mr. Caldwell?" "A mechanics." Mechanics don't get Del Mosby driving down from Black Mountain to sort valve springs for free. Holt set the micrometer down. He looked at her for a long count. He did not answer. She held his gaze longer than she had held anyone's in a year. She did not feel anger. She did not feel suspicion. She felt something she did not have a name for. She left without asking again. That night she pulled the framed photograph off the credenza and held it under the desk lamp. The man in the lab coat and hard hat. She still could not see his face, but she could see his hands resting on the bench beside her father's. Long fingers, a wedding band. A small scar across the back of the right knuckle. She had seen that scar 3 days ago, in a coffee shop, gripping a pen. The third week, Maren came to the shop 3 times. She did not announce a reason. The first time she sat on the wooden chair in the small office and drank a cup of the coffee Holt had on the burner. The second time she brought a paperback and read it. The third time she walked out into the bay and stood 10 feet from the bench where Holt was timing the valves on block number 1. She watched his hands. Wren came in from school at 4:15. She set her backpack on the office chair, walked into the bay, saw Maren, and stopped. "You came back." "I came back. Do you want to read with me?" "I have a book about engines." Maren opened her mouth to say no. She said yes. They sat in the office, the book between them on a low table. Wren explained the 4-stroke cycle the way only a serious 9-year-old can. Intake, compression, combustion, exhaust. Maren laughed once. It was the first time she had laughed since her father died. At the bench, Holt slowed his hands. He did not look up. He did not stop working. But he wiped the same shaft 3 times. The next morning she drove to Black Mountain and parked outside Del Mosby's house. She rang the bell. Del answered in a faded Verain racing shirt with motor oil on his fingertips. Mr. Mosby, who was the original chief powertrain engineer for the VP7 program. Del looked at her for a long second. He still had a non-disclosure that had outlived its purpose by years. You've met him. Where? You already know where. She drove back toward Asheville. She did not go to the shop. She parked across the street, 200 yards down, and watched the yellow light fall through the bay windows. She saw Holt show Wren how to hold a small torque wrench. She saw him laugh at something the girl said. She did not go in. Friday morning, Voss appeared in her office with a slim file folder. You need to see this. Holt Caldwell, the recipient of the Heritage engines, may be in violation of the non-compete he signed in 2018. If he successfully restores VP7 specification, we have grounds to sue, recover all 6 units, and collect damages. He set the folder on her desk. On top was a photograph from 2014. Holt at the powertrain bench, Wallace's hand on his shoulder. Maren looked at the photograph for 10 seconds without breathing. Let him finish. The minute the first one runs, we file. He loses everything. She closed the folder. She did not move it. She did not return Voss's gaze. Thank you, Garrett. Leave it with me. When he was gone, she put the folder in her bottom drawer and turned the key in the lock. She did not know what to do. She did know one thing. Voss had built this file. Voss knew exactly who Holt was. Voss had still signed the disposal order, which meant Voss had wanted Holt to receive those engines. On Monday of the 4th week, Maren drove back to Asheville with a wooden box on the passenger seat. The box was 11 inches wide, 6 deep, fitted with a small brass clasp. She had found it in her father's personal safe 2 weeks after his funeral and had been unable to open it. Unable, then unwilling. The key had been in his desk drawer the entire time, taped to the underside of a leather blotter. She set the box on the bench in front of Holt. Her hand stayed on the lid for a moment before she lifted it away. My father kept this in his private safe. I have never opened it. I want you to open it with me. Holt wiped his hands on a clean shop rag. He undid the brass clasp. The box held 3 things: a folded letter on Wallace's personal stationery, the cream paper with a small embossed V in the corner, a small black USB drive on a steel keyring, and a sealed manila envelope marked Codicil in Wallace's handwriting. The letters slanted forward the way they always had been. Maren opened the letter first. It was dated June 2017. It was addressed to Wallace's private attorney and had never been mailed. She read it aloud, her voice steady through the first paragraph and then quieter through the rest. Wallace had discovered, through an internal audit he had commissioned without telling the board, that Garrett Voss had been embezzling through false disposal contracts since 2015, $4.7 million over 26 months. The disposed assets, mostly Heritage engines and prototype castings, had not been destroyed. They had been sold privately to collectors in the UAE and Japan, routed through a chain of shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The letter included account numbers, dates, and the names of 2 brokers who had handled the transfers. Wallace had written that he intended to fire Voss the following month. He had also written that he intended to reinstate Holt Caldwell as chief powertrain engineer, with a full restoration of the $2.4 million severance the board had withheld, plus interest. He had died of a stroke 3 weeks after writing the letter. The day after Maren's 34th birthday, Maren set the letter down on the bench. Her hand was steady. Her breath was not. She opened the codicil envelope. The document inside was notarized, sealed, and signed by 2 witnesses she did not recognize. It named Holt Caldwell as Heritage Engineering trustee in perpetuity, with 12% equity in Verain Holdings, contingent upon the formal reinstatement of the VP7 program. The USB held the full ledger of Voss's false contracts, names, buyers, wire dates, cross-referenced against internal Verain disposal manifests. Maren did not cry. Her hands settled very slowly onto the bench, one on either side of the open box. I signed a paper giving you $4,000 to haul away 6 engines worth millions. I was a fool. You weren't a fool. You were lied to. There is a difference. Why didn't you tell me at the start? Because you didn't know who I was. Telling you wouldn't have changed the engines. You would have looked at me and seen a man making a claim with no way to verify it in a shop in Asheville. I needed to save them whether you believed me or not. She looked at him for a long time. The light through the bay window caught the line of his jaw, the gray at his temple, the scar on his right knuckle. My father chose you. Your father was a good man. He never told me about the codicil. I would have refused it if he had. I'm not my father. I know. But you can be yourself. Wren came in from the office with 2 mugs. She handed one to Maren. The cocoa had a small marshmallow floating in the middle, slightly off-center, the way a child pours it. Dad says when people are sad, they drink cocoa. I made it for you. Maren took the mug. She did not drink. She held it in both hands, and she did not let it go for a long time. That night, from a parking lot in West Asheville, she called her personal attorney. Emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. Bring every disposal contract from the last 3 years, and Henry. Do not tell anyone, especially not Garrett. By the end of the 5th week, engine number 1 was on the dyno mount. The dyno room was a small concrete annex behind the main shop. Steel walls, a blast door, a single thick window into the control booth. Holt had built the room himself in 2020, paying for the soundproofing in installments over 8 months. Holt set the harness, fuel line, ignition, coolant. He checked each connection twice, then a third time. He had not slept more than 4 hours a night in the past 2 weeks. His hands were steady. Wren sat in the booth with ear protection and a paperback. Dell stood at the data console. Maren stood beside Holt, 3 feet from the engine itself, the smell of fresh oil and warm metal in the air. She had taken off her jacket. Her sleeves were pushed up to the elbow, which was something he had never seen her do. You start it. Me. Your father always had someone from outside the engineering side start the first one. He said it was how you knew the engine would accept a new pair of hands. She set her palm on the ignition switch. She looked at him once. He nodded. She pressed it. The starter motor cranked. The engine coughed. It caught. The V8 settled into the deep, even idle that VP7 had always been known for, and the dyno needles began to climb. Holt's eyes did not leave the gauges. Torque rose. Horsepower rose. Thermal output stayed inside the green band. The console logged 612 horsepower at 6,300 RPM, 4% above the original 2014 specification. Dell exhaled, the sound almost a laugh. What did you do to the valve timing, son? I had 8 years to think about how to do it better. Maren watched the engine she had paid $4,000 to throw away pull its own weight on the dyno. She did not move for a long minute. The vibration came through the concrete floor into the soles of her shoes and up through her shins. She remembered, suddenly, sitting on her father's shoulders at a test session in 2004, holding her hands over her ears while he laughed. Then she picked up her phone and walked to the corner of the room. She made one call. Mr. Bellini, Maren Verain. I have 6 restored VP7 engines, better than original specification. Dyno verified. The voice on the other end paused. Who certified them? Holt Caldwell. The pause was longer this time. Holt Caldwell, the original chief powertrain engineer of the VP7. Yes. I will take all 6. 500,000 each. 3 million total. I will have my technical team in Asheville within 48 hours for acceptance. We can wire the deposit tonight. Wren. I have been trying to buy these engines for 7 years. I know. I read the file last night. Maren set the phone on the bench. She walked back to Holt. He had cut the engine. The dyno was cooling, the gauges drifting down through the green. You didn't need me to sell them. You could have sold them yourself the day I left. You needed them. I needed them fixed. The selling was always yours. Why? Because they were not mine to sell. Your father built the program. You inherited it. I only built the engines. She did not answer. She put a hand on the cooling shroud and held it there until it stopped being warm. That Monday evening, Voss came to her office in Charlotte with a sealed envelope and a soft, satisfied smile. He had brought 2 of his own attorneys. He had brought a press statement. I think we're ready to file. Caldwell completed the first engine yesterday. We have him. Maren slid an unmarked folder across the desk to him. It was not the folder he had given her 2 weeks earlier. He opened it. The first page was a wire transfer record from a UAE shell company, June 2016, signed Garrett A. Voss. The color went out of his face by the third page. By the fifth page, his hands were no longer steady. She pressed the intercom. Security. Please escort Mr. Voss out of the building. Now. The Wednesday after, Maren walked into the Verain boardroom with 3 folios and Holt beside her. He wore a clean flannel shirt. He did not pretend it was a suit. The board had been told only that the meeting concerned a fiduciary matter of significant scale, and that the COO would not be present. There were 9 board members. 3 of them had been on the board when Wallace was still alive. 6 had been added in the 18 months since. Maren laid out the evidence in 42 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. The false disposal contracts, $6.8 million in embezzlement across 9 years, the UAE wires, the Japanese wires, the $2.4 million withheld from Holt's severance in 2018, traced to a shell account Voss controlled. Del Mosby's signed statement, sealed and notarized that morning by Maren's personal attorney. The Wallace letter. The codicil. The board sat very still. The lawyer at the end of the table cleared his throat twice and asked no question. When she finished, the silence held for almost a full minute. Someone at the far end finally asked about the $3 million from Bellini, wired this morning. Full amount. To the corporate operating account. No commission taken by Caldwell Powertrain. Mr. Caldwell waived the commission in writing before the sale closed. Who restored the engines? Maren nodded toward Holt. This man. The original chief powertrain engineer of the VP7. The man my father chose in 2009 and was unable to reinstate in 2017 because he died first. She presented the codicil. 12% equity, Heritage Engineering trustee. The vote was unanimous before she had finished reading the motion. 3 of the older members of the board stood. One of them, a man who had known Wallace for 40 years, walked the length of the table and shook Holt's hand without speaking. The VP7 program was reinstated by board resolution within the hour. Holt was named Chief Powertrain Engineer, reporting directly to the CEO. Not through the COO chain. The $2.4 million that had been withheld in 2018 was authorized for immediate disbursement, with 9 years of interest at the federal funds rate. Voss was indicted by the end of the week. His assets were frozen pending forfeiture. The press release was drafted by Maren herself and went out on Friday morning. When the meeting let out, Holt and Maren walked together to the parking garage. The afternoon light came in low through the concrete pillars, slanting across the painted parking lines. They were not touching. They were walking at the same pace. You're not moving to Charlotte? No. Wren's school is in Asheville. The shop is in Asheville. I'll commute 2 hours each way, twice a week. I'm used to longer drives. I drove farther than that to take Eleanor to her treatments. It was the first time he had said her name in front of Maren. He did not stop walking when he said it. She stopped beside her car. She did not open the door. The keys hung loose in her hand. Or, I could come to Asheville more often. You could. She looked at him. The light caught the edge of her jaw and the line where she had set it against the day. Thank you. For the 6 engines. And for the rest of it. The things you didn't say. The things you let me figure out on my own. You don't have to thank me. I'm going to anyway. She got in the car. He watched her pull out of the garage. Then he drove the 2 hours home to Asheville with the windows down and the radio off, the way he had not driven in 9 years. That night, in the office at the back of the shop, Wren looked up from her math homework. Dad, is Miss Maren going to come to Asheville to see us? He sat down beside her and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The lamp on the desk was the same lamp that had been on his father's desk in 1992. Maybe, sweetheart, maybe. Asheville turned in early October. Red maple along Sweeten Creek Road. The air had the clean, cold edge that came down from the Smokies after the first frost. Maren rented a small house on Beaver Dam Road, 11 minutes from the shop. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a wood stove she did not yet know how to use. She drove up Friday evenings and back to Charlotte on Sunday nights. She did not call it anything yet, neither did Holt. She had moved into the role of CEO with a new kind of quiet. The board had stopped second-guessing her after the Voss meeting. She had hired a new COO from outside the company, a woman who had run powertrain for a small Italian manufacturer for 9 years. Maren spent Tuesday mornings on the phone with her, going through the program reinstatement line by line. On Saturday mornings, she let Wren teach her how to peel apples. Wren had a small knife with a bone handle, a present from her father. She held it with the seriousness of a surgeon, and showed Maren how to take the peel off in one long spiral. Maren's first 3 apples ended in pieces. Her 4th ended in one curl. Wren said gravely, "That's better, Miss Maren. Dad will be proud." Holt watched from the kitchen doorway and did not say anything. The kettle whistled behind him, and he turned away to lift it off the burner. When he turned back, Maren was teaching Wren how to fold the peel into a small rose, the way her own mother had taught her in 2004. In the afternoons, he took her into the shop. 3 new engines were on the bench, the VP8 prototype. He and Dell were 6 weeks into it, redesigning the block from the casting up. Maren sat on the wooden chair and watched him work the way she had watched him in week 3, except now the silence between them was a thing they shared instead of a thing she was studying. "Do you miss Charlotte? I drive there every Tuesday." "That's not what I asked." He set down the depth gauge. He took a long breath before he answered, which was something he had never done in front of her before. "I don't miss Charlotte. I miss a few people in Charlotte." She did not ask which people. On Sunday, they walked along the French Broad River. Wren ran ahead, throwing flat stones across the slow water. Holt and Maren walked behind her, 2 paces apart. The leaves had begun to drop. The air smelled of damp earth and cold stone. "Your father believed in valve timing. He used to say a good engine depends on it. The right moment. Not early, not late. And a life. The same." They walked a long way without speaking. Wren turned and waved at them from a flat rock above the water. That evening, before she left for Charlotte, Holt handed her a small wooden box. She opened it. Inside was a single piston, cast bronze, polished to a soft gleam. The base was engraved, VP7, serial 0017, Sebring 12 hours, 2014. "What is this?" "A piece of the first engine you started. I kept it from the dyno test." "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because you should have something that started under your hand." She did not say thank you. She set the box on the passenger seat, looked at him for 1 second, and pulled out of the driveway. The next Friday, she came back, and the Friday after that, 6 months later, Daytona International Speedway, the second weekend of March. The VP7 program had been formally reinstated in December. The car carried the number 17 on the door, the same number that had taken Sebring in 2014. The paint scheme was the same. The driver was the son of the man who had won that race 11 years before. Wren was 10 now. She stood between Holt and Maren in the pit garage, ear protection clipped over her hair, a small notebook in her hand. She tracked telemetry the way the engineers did. Lap times in one column, fuel pressures in the next, in a careful child's hand. She had asked Holt 3 weeks earlier whether she could come along. He had said yes before she finished the question. The race ran 4 hours. The 17 car led its class for 3 of them. The engine never strayed from the green band. The driver came on the radio at lap 198, his voice tight with concentration but steady, asking for fuel calculations. Holt answered him himself, leaning over the engineer's console. The car crossed the line first in GT. The garage erupted. The crew threw their headsets in the air. Dell, watching from the pit wall, pumped one fist once, and then walked away to wipe his eyes where no one could see him. Wren turned and threw herself into Holt's chest. He caught her, one arm around her and the other he extended toward Maren. Maren stepped into the half-circle of his free arm. She let his hand close on her shoulder. It was not long. A few seconds, long enough for Wren to glance up between them, smile once, and turn back to watch the team lift the trophy. That night, on the balcony of the hotel above the beach, Wren was asleep in the next room, the engine textbook open on her chest. The Atlantic moved in long, slow lines under the moon. Maren stood at the railing. Holt came out and stood beside her, not close, not far. "My father would be proud." He was proud. "Before I ever met you again." She was quiet for a long time. The wind off the water moved the loose hair at her temple. "You know, I signed a piece of paper giving you $4,000 to haul away 6 engines. I called you a backwoods mechanic. In a coffee shop, in front of 3 lawyers and a room full of strangers. In the end, those 6 engines brought me here. It wasn't the engines that brought you here. What was it?" He did not answer. He looked at her. She understood. She did not need the words. They stood at the railing for a long time without speaking. The wind off the water moved her hair against her cheek. He did not reach for it. She did not move away. She placed her hand on the rail beside his, not touching. Close. He thought then about what Wallace had said in the shop in 2017. A good engine depends on valve timing, the right moment. Not early, not late. He thought about Eleanor, and the 4 years he had walked through alone with Wren, and the 6 dust-covered blocks on the concrete floor 7 months ago. He thought about the woman who had stood in his bay in a charcoal Range Rover and called his shop rustic, and how she was standing beside him now at a railing above the Atlantic, in a place neither of them had planned to be. Maybe a life had valve timing too. Maybe Maren had come not too early and not too late. Maybe she had come exactly when he was ready to let another person walk into the shop without breaking what he had carefully kept. She turned her face toward him in the dark. She did not say anything. The waves kept their long, even rhythm below them. In the next room, Wren slept with the engine book rising and falling on her chest. Some things did not need to be lit to be known.